All right, guys, we're going to have a little chat about intake horns. Josh from Horse Torque was talking a little bit about intake horns because lots of guys asked him about running a stock intake horn. And people have asked me as well. My 3/4 ton has a dual ram from Banks on it. The Shorty is getting this 5.9 common rail 3.5 inch one. Do I recommend doing intake horns? I personally, if you're looking to make a bunch of power, I personally would put one on. Do they make a huge difference? I don't know. That one's to be seen yet. When I get the dyno and the flow bench, we will do a bunch of testing. But I don't have either of those yet, so we're just going to talk about it. But some of that is in the works. I have been actively looking for a flow bench. I just haven't found one, the one that I want for the price that I want to pay, because I could go buy a brand new one, but I don't think I'm going to use it enough to warrant buying a brand new one. Anyways, what I wanted to talk a little bit about intake horns. So I'll bring you guys over here quick first so you can see what I'm talking about. So now the VE stuff, if you have an intercooled VE or non-intercooled VE, both of those I would recommend doing an intake horn or a better intake. Regardless, I don't care if the thing makes 5 horsepower. You know, like, obviously you know what I'm saying. Even if it makes stock horsepower, because they're very, very restrictive, I would recommend doing something on those regardless. Now, 12 valve, P-pump 12 valve. Actually, I got these in the wrong order. Hold on. This one, I've seen these on a bunch of different trucks, so I honestly don't even know. I've seen them on VP44 trucks and also common rails. This one come off of an 03 common rail. Common rail, all these are 5.9, no 6.7 stuff. And then obviously a Banks 3.5 inch inlet. They're monster ram. So just talking about this, personally, if you have one of these, if you see how this has those cutouts and this one doesn't, if you look inside there, see the difference? See how big that one is versus that one? This one, you should take and do that with it. If you have one of those, take it off. That is a restriction. I don't care who you are. Because even if you look at a 12 valve one, see how the 12 valve one is basically the same inside as this one, or very similar anyway. They're not exactly the same, but very similar. So taking this and putting it on your 12 valve P pump, I don't think it makes any difference. If you're going to do that, obviously I would open up, if you're going to monkey around with it, you can actually see where the gasket used to go on there. I personally would open this up a bit if you want, so that anytime you're going to hit turbulence, that's an issue. You don't want turbulence, because turbulence will rob horsepower. But when you get into actually switching one of these things, at what point should you be switching from one of these to one of these? Now, Josh over at Horse Torques has made 2,000 horsepower. And I'll be honest, it's more power than I've ever made on anything. Some of that, I'm not a huge common rail guy. So, you know, some of that's a little on the limiting factor. Now I'm going to start getting into do some common rail stuff. We'll get into that later. But I'm going to monkey around with some common rail stuff, though it will be in a second gen, not in a third gen, because I don't like third gens. So, has nothing to do with third gens. I just don't like the look of the truck. But we're going to monkey around with some common rail stuff in the near future. Now, when would I recommend going from this to this, or from, you know, if you're talking 12 valve? 12 valve, you're a little bit more limited. Banks does have the dual ram setup, which I have on my 3/4 ton. I do like that. There is all kinds of different ones that you can use and make, and if you're handy fabricating stuff, you can fabricate stuff. So it does make it better than this, in my opinion. Now, I would recommend going to this if you have changed your intercooler to a different intercooler. And I'm going to put you guys back up on the stand here, just so I don't know how shaky that's going to be with me holding it. Hopefully it's not too bad. I would recommend doing one of these, and obviously if you're going to have the 3.5 inch inlet, personally I would have the 3.5 inch pipe. If you're going to a bigger intercooler, if you have a 3.5-inch pipe coming off the intercooler, I wouldn't step it up and down. There again, turbulence. Do these help, like astronomically? I would say in a lower horsepower truck, they probably don't make a huge difference, but anytime you can free up turbulence or free up flow, I personally don't think it hurts. Same idea with anything. Bigger garden hose flows more water. Now, you have to take in consideration though, if you have a stock turbocharger and a stock intercooler and you put this on, will it make a difference? I don't know if it would make much of a difference, because the restriction at that point isn't this, it's the intercooler. So putting one of these on, now if you want to do water meth and you want to have one of these and you want to upgrade it, don't get me wrong, I wouldn't steer you away from doing it just for that reason. But if you're doing it only because this is going to flow more than this one, if the rest of the system is still factory or not up to the point where this is the restriction, you don't need to put this on. But if you're buying, like if you wanted to do an intercooler, you can buy, there again, Banks. I don't know why I've used a lot of Bank stuff. It's easy for me to get. I like the product. He does put a lot of research, R&D into it. He spends a lot of money with R&D. So maybe that has something to do with it. But you can buy a kit, like if you're doing a common rail, you can buy a kit from them for your common rail. Let's say, well, I don't know if you can do it for the 4th gens or not. You can do it for 3rd gens for sure, because I just sold one not that long ago. But you can do it, intercooler, piping, and all that stuff comes with the intercooler, or comes with the intercooler, the pipe, the tubes, the clamps, everything. So if you're going to do that, I would recommend doing that. But if you have a turbocharger that, let's say, flows, 600 CFM, this will flow 600 CFM. So at that point, I don't know whether there's a huge benefit in it. Don't get me wrong, like I said, porting it a little bit so that you don't have an edge, so the air doesn't have a wall, because you don't want the air to hit a wall. If the air can go by it nicely, it flows easier, less turbulence, and then there's less turbulence makes the airflow easier, so less restriction technically. Now talking about 12 valve stuff, there again, if you're running a stock turbo, is it going to make a difference going from this to something like this? Obviously you can't do that because they don't make it anymore. But going to a dual ram setup from them or whatever brand you want to use, I don't think it makes that much of a difference. Now an intercooler does make a difference because of the restriction in the intercooler. But if you're staying stock turbo or relatively stock turbo, I don't know how much difference it's going to make. Does it hurt it? Absolutely not. So if you want to do it, if you want to run water meth and you want to have it so that you have the ports, these ones were water meth ports. I think they actually put these ones in for water meth too, but I would use these ones because then they're spraying straight down. But if you want to do it for water meth, you don't want to drill into stuff, like you don't feel comfortable doing that. Okay, I understand. You can do the water meth. You don't have to drill and tap anything. You get a bigger intake out of the deal. Perfect. If that's the reason, all right, I understand. I understand the madness to do it, right? Like the theory behind it. So if that's the case, by all means, if you want to do one, it's not going to hurt you, but I don't know if you're going to see a lot of gain. Now, that being said, as soon as we have the tools to test that, we will test that and we will find out. So I just wanted to talk a little bit. Now if you're talking about a truck that, let's say, my buddy Matt, he's got that 3rd gen with compounds on it and that stuff. That truck has actually has one of these Banks kits on it. But if it has a Banks or if it has a set of turbos that will flow, let's say for argument's sake, let's just say 1,000 CFM. And you have an intake horn that will only flow the restriction side of things, and if your intake heater is deleted, blah, 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 all that stuff. If you're now at the point where you have an intercooler and 3.5-inch pipe going here, let's say, I don't even know if a 3.5-inch pipe makes that much difference, but there again, it's the turbulent thing. So if it's a 3.5-inch here, and then you go up and down, then you get turbulence in the air, which you don't want. But if you get to the point where this is a restriction, like if this will only flow X amount of CFM, then this will be the restriction. Or a source of restriction. I shouldn't say the restriction, a source of restriction, or there again, turbulence. Now the air is going to flow better through this than this just because of the design. You know, like the guys, and a lot of guys that have spent a lot of time designing stuff in general, like it does make a difference. Like they spend, like I said, Banks spends a lot of time R&D, a lot. Not that saying the other companies don't, but they spend a lot of time with doing it, and you know, Gale Banks has been doing it for years. There again, I'm not trying to say they're the best out of everybody, blah, blah, blah. I run a lot of their stuff because I like that they spend a lot of money in R&D, and they tend to show a lot of stuff like to help people understand why they like their product better. But every company does that. Every company, you know, our product is better than everybody else's. But they physically take it, you know, they buy all these intake horns or whatever product they're working on and say, okay, here you go. Not that, now, granted, they're not the cheapest product. If you're looking for the cheapest product, that is not them. But if you say, you know, they take all of the intake horns and they test them. Like they did it on the 6.7s. I don't think they ever did it on 5.9, but I could be wrong. I remember seeing the 6.7 one. But they bought a bunch of intake horns and they actually tested them all. Theirs came out on top, but regardless, they did do the test. Nobody else did the test. So, you know, if that's the case, then I don't know. But that's the reason that you know, like it's a lot of it. If you're staying with a stockish truck, like I said, if you have that one intake horn with the cutouts, get rid of that one. But if you're running one of these, a relatively stock truck, I personally think that there's money. If you've got everything else done and not an intake horn, yes, that would be my next step. But if you don't have all the rest of the stuff done, I wouldn't spend your money here before I spend it somewhere else. You get a good deal on one or something like that, or you just want it for a cosmetic, you want it for you know, more ports for you know, put a boost gauge in, or water meth, or if you wanted to spray a little bit of nitrous at it. But if you're running stock stuff, you shouldn't spray nitrous at it. But that idea, you know, so hopefully that makes sense. You know, at a certain point you're going to hit a restriction wall, and if the intake horn is the restriction, then yes, you should do it. But if everything else is stock, I personally don't think it makes that much of a difference, because you're not going to outflow that. That's not it's a restriction, but it's not the restriction. You have to free up everything else before this becomes the restriction. So hopefully that makes sense. Let me know down in the comments if I explained it as I was hoping to explain it. If not, I'll do another video. I'll get rid of this one. Like, subscribe, hit me down in the comments, and remember, it's not rocket science. A little extra for you guys that are still here. Something that I did want to mention on these intake horns. Now, if you take an engine that's running 4,000 RPM, let's say, that engine is going to consume, now the efficiency side of things changes a little bit, but a turbocharged diesel will consume, let's say, about 1,300 CFM of air. Now, like I said, that being said, depending on the restriction, what turbocharger, blah, 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 blah. But if that's at that point is if you're flowing, I shouldn't say that, I got to reword that. Now, if you're flowing, let's say 1,200 CFM, the intake horn, a stock intake horn, is going to be a restriction. If you're running a stock intake horn, that's going to be a restriction. If you go to one of these, it's not going to be a restriction. Well, it is to a certain point, but this will flow more air than this in general. So not really much you can do about it. So if that's the case, you should be running one of these, not one of these. So anyways,